This is episode 61 of the Gruler Nation podcast. My name is Robert Gruler, joined today by John Little. John Little is a candidate for the Scottsdale City Council. John, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Rob. It's great to be here.
So I met you very briefly at a Scottsdale leadership event and invited you on the show. I'm excited to talk to you about it, but I know very little about you and about what you're doing. And I know the city council is a coveted position, and it's a big deal. So you're running for that office. But let's kind of start at the top. I'd like to learn a little bit more about John Little, about where you came from, why you're making this run, what kind of the evolution looked like. If we can start there.
All right, be happy to. Probably going back to 1985. I was living in Minneapolis, and I'd always been. I went to the University of Minnesota. Grew up during the 1960s, and public service had just always been part of my DNA.
Yeah.
I was a Kennedy kid. 1961, President Kennedy challenged us and said, think not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I took it seriously, and most of my contemporaries at the time did too. So we had most of the people I knew were going into the Peace Corps, or they were going into community organizing, or they were doing public service. They were working for nonprofits. Some of them chose to go into the military and go to Vietnam during the height of the Vietnam War. But very few of my contemporaries were looking for careers in business. They were looking for careers in public service, and I was just like them. I worked for the Metropolitan Transit Commission and was a transit planner. I wanted to build transportation networks for communities. I wanted to make my community a better place to live.
Yeah.
However I could do that. 1985, I left Minneapolis and I came to Scottsdale, Arizona. There's a long story there. Clearly, your podcast cannot run long enough for me to tell that story.
Sure.
But suffice it to say, it was pre-internet, and I came down to Scottsdale from Minneapolis with a Sunday newspaper with a bunch of want ads, going to find a job down here. At the time, I was married and had a one-year-old child. The first place I stopped into was the city of Scottsdale. The human resources director, unbeknownst, no appointment or anything, he spent 3.5 hours with me and took me on a tour of the Scottsdale campus and showed me around and talked with great passion about what a wonderful place this was. I fell in love with the city. I called my wife back at home. I said, I'm going to stay down there till they offer me a job, which took about 6 weeks, but ultimately they did, which started a 24-year career at the city of Scottsdale.
Wow.
As a way that I could continue my public service. I came in as an entry-level employee, and like I said, worked there 24 years. I was promoted 9 times and ended up in the city's top job as the city manager. So public service has always been part of my DNA, but like I said, for all those years, I was on the administrative side of the city, and on the other side of the table sat the policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different world. And so when I left the city in 2009, I said, I want to sit on the other side of the table. I want to be part of provide the policy direction for the community. And so I thought that this is the next evolution of my community service.
Yeah, and that's a lot of time in service. And when you're on the administrative side, you're just executing what the policymakers are telling you to do. You don't have much influence in that, it sounds like.
That's right. You are, some people would call you a bureaucrat, but that's what we did. We would wait for the 4 members of the 7-member council
Yeah.
to provide direction. And once they provided direction, my job was to marshal the resources of 2,600 employees and a multi-billion-dollar capital and operating budget to achieve the objectives the policymakers set forth. And that's what your job is.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm a political science major. I studied law. I went to law school. I practiced law and everything. And my knowledge about what the city council does is embarrassingly small. It's it's not a lot. Most people are very familiar with the federal government, right? We all know the three branches. We know what most of us do, or should. You would hope, yeah. Should. And you know what the House does and the Senate does and the president. Everybody gets all jazzed up when it's election time for that. Same with a lot of what goes on in the state government. But when you break it down to the city council and some of the more local stuff, which really has more of an impact on your day to day than what we're doing over in some country that nobody's ever heard of. But can you educate me and us a little bit about what the city council does? I think a lot of people will see what happened on Parks and Rec or something. It's a TV show, that where there was, it's kind of jokey, but it's real serious business. I mean, Scottsdale is one of the biggest economies in the country in terms of a city, right? It's a really big entity, and so there are a lot of responsibilities. But before we dive into sort of what your position is going to be on some of those issues, can you tell us a little bit about what the city council does, why it's so important?
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's a big enterprise. It's the 85th, I think, largest city in the country.
Yeah,
where it's 250,000 people. 1980, Scottsdale was only 80,000 people.
Yeah.
So there's been tremendous growth. It's a city that at its widest geography is only 11 miles wide, and that's roughly along the Shea corridor. But it's also 33 miles long, which presents a real challenge in trying to maintain a cohesive relationship between the people that live so far apart and so dispersed.
Yeah.
So it's the geography, number one, is a challenge. The city itself provides all the services within that geography, all the essential services. It provides you with the fire department and the police department, public safety resources. When you turn on your tap, your water is coming from a water treatment facility, pumping stations. We manage all the roadways. We take care of all the city's infrastructure, the bridges, the sidewalks, the parks. We build the libraries. All the things that touch you on a daily basis are provided for by your municipal government. And like I mentioned, it takes 2,600 employees to do that on a daily basis. And unlike many other enterprises, there are 343 different career occupations in the city.
Yeah.
And that's from accountants to people that know how to repair a water pump to a police officer and a HR staff, accounting staff. There's just a wide variety of occupations that are necessary to keep the city operating. The city relies on taxes, of course, to fund this enterprise, and I think we're the third largest employer in Scottsdale, behind General Dynamics and Honor Health.
Okay.
So it's a significant employer.
Yeah.
We provide a lot of jobs. And the overall function of the city is to provide a decent, safe, and sanitary experience for the people that choose to invest their money to live here and to buy property and to send their kids to schools. And so the city has two really critical functions. One is to manage the day-to-day activities and the essential services for the city. But the second one is to look to the future and do long-range strategic planning and policy setting to make sure that the generation that follows you and I, Rob, has as nice a place to live as we do today.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are amazing numbers. I'm kind of surprised you had those just ready to go, but it makes sense to me, given the fact that you're running for the position. But it's very Scottsdale is very impressive. I mean, it is growing. I think I think statewide or Maricopa County, they were saying like 200 people a day are moving here. Scottsdale is home to one of or many of some of the biggest companies in the country, if not the world. We've got like GoDaddy and Discount Tire and all these different places that are all based here. So and it's a powerhouse in terms of what is happening in Arizona. So, Scottsdale, we have the Waste Management Open. I mean, we have all sorts of things going on in Scottsdale, Westworld, and all sorts of stuff. which is I guess a great kind of segue into talking about what your vision for those things are. So your idea of, yes, operating, maintaining a safe and sanitary and functioning city. Yes, right. Everybody wants that.
Yeah.
I think where the difference is going to be in what your vision is for what Scottsdale can be.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think all too often we're as a culture in America, we're very motivated by self-interest, and the issue of the day seems to captivate our attention most of the time, and we just, in my opinion, don't spend enough time thinking about the future and our responsibility as stewards. We are stewards of the future community of Scottsdale,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think, when you ask me what my vision for the community is, it's to create a community where it's a sustainable environment, that we have a really strong economic base, that we protect our tourism industry, which is at the heart of our local economy,
Mm-hmm.
that we sustain and build on the special events that make Scottsdale so important. And if there were three things that I see as my core responsibilities as a council member, would be to keep taxes low,
Mm-hmm.
to protect property values and neighborhoods, and also to maintain the highest possible level of service possible. So if we can keep taxes low and provide high levels of service and
Mm-hmm.
protect property values, and we have a plan for doing that over time,
Mm-hmm.
then we're doing a great job.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the Scottsdale city, they can pass their own taxes to tack on to the state and federal taxes. How does that work?
Well, yeah, the city of Scottsdale is, by constitution, charter city. So yes, we can levy taxes, which we did to buy the preserve, which is also one of the distinguishing features of our community.
Yeah.
One that many giants long ago envisioned doing, that we were going to tax ourselves to buy open space for the future of the city. It was very visionary. And so, those kinds of activities that we do as a city are the kinds of things I think that, that help sustain us. So we can pass our own taxes for our own purposes.
Yeah.
We also rely on property tax, but the beauty of Scottsdale is the bed tax. Our visitors pay a good share of our taxes for
Okay.
the city, so that we don't have to. That's one of the ways that we can keep our tax rate low. And Scottsdale is one of the lowest taxed cities in the entire Valley of the Sun.
Yeah, the city council positions, are those broken out by party? Do people run as Republicans or Democrats or different categories of people, or is it more nonpartisan?
That's a really good fundamental question, too, that people should understand, is that our city charter is like our city constitution, and it
Okay.
defines what those rules are. So one of the first rules for running for city council is it is a nonpartisan race.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. In fact, I used to be the chief of staff for the legendary Mayor Herb Drinkwater. And when I came on board to his staff, he says, "John, just remember one thing." He says, "Potholes aren't Democrats or Republicans.
That's right.
They just need fixing.
Yeah.
That's all. So if you just stay focused on
Yeah.
that, we're not going to get involved in politics."
Yeah. I only use liberal cement in my.
Do
in
you?
my-
Yeah.
yeah, I only use liberal cement. Yeah, yeah. Because it's more accepting of everything. It fills all the holes.
The second thing is that's really important, I think, for people to understand, that we're one of the few cities of the size we are that elects all its elected officials at large. We don't have districts.
Yeah, that was something else I didn't understand, because
Yeah.
when you run for the state government, you run for a specific house, right? Or you run for a specific, a bounded area, a jurisdiction that you run, you get that seat. So for city council, how does the election work? I mean, everybody runs and they pick the top 7?
Every 2 years, we'll either have 3 people running or 4 people running, so that we always maintain some level of continuity in our governance model. But when you run from north to south, all 33 of those miles I was talking about. You have to keep in mind the needs of our community and the people that live in the south, as well as the people that live in the north. And those needs are very different.
Yeah.
Very markedly different, and a source of contention in our community about disparities of service levels, disparities of landscaping. The community can look different in different places, and people pay attention to that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's marked. I mean, you can go from South Scottsdale and live, it's one type of neighborhood, and go to North Scottsdale, and it's considerably more affluent.
Yes.
And there is, I think, popular, jokes and stuff about, South Scottsdale, North Scottsdale, and everything like that. But it is all Scottsdale, and every single resident should deserve the same treatment, I would imagine.
Yeah, 15 years ago, the Morrison Institute at the Arizona State University, the Morrison Institute of Public Policy, was asked by Scottsdale business leaders to do an assessment of Scottsdale. And it was called Which Way Scottsdale?
Okay.
In that assessment, it noted that one of our greatest vulnerabilities as a community is the fact that there appears to be 3 different Scottsdales.
Yeah.
There's the south and the middle and the north. And they said if you don't pay attention to that, it can come up and bite you. And so that the city should pay more attention to the disparities of any kind of service or representation. The people in the South have long felt, I think, that their voices aren't heard as clearly as perhaps people that live up in the north part of our community.
Sure.
And so, as an elected official who has to represent the entire city, it's important that we listen to all voices. And that study, I think, was really, really important. It also noted that complacency was also perhaps one of our greatest potential enemies, because Scottsdale is everyone that lives here feels quite blessed. It's a very safe community. It is a community of means.
Yeah.
School systems are good, and we live in a wonderful place. But if you take that for granted, and if you're complacent about it, you run the risk of other communities outpacing you in economic development. Maybe they'll get special events that'll draw tourism away. So we have to stay on our game, Rob. It's really important.
Yeah, and I think kind of in recent years there's been more and more of a trend to focusing on South Scottsdale, right? Isn't there a lot of activity going on in South Scottsdale? I mean, I know the Papago Plaza and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's some pretty good things happening there.
Yeah, no, that's. I think that there's a renewed commitment to the southern part of our community. I think there's a renewed interest on the part of the people that live there to get involved in their government. And I'm seeing some really positive changes in that regard. And I'm very optimistic about the future of South Scottsdale. And one of the things maybe we'll chat about a little bit later is our relationship with the Salt River community and all the activity over there and how that's impacting South Scottsdale. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Does the city council do they take responsibility, or are they responsible for some of that economic development? I mean, are they responsible for gearing that?
Yeah, in South Scottsdale, for example, the city of Scottsdale worked very closely with ASU to bring the Sky Song project there, for example, and it's a wonderful incubator of new businesses and innovation and creativity.
Yeah.
The city, in partnership with ASU and the private sector, created something very special there, which is, I think emerging as the heartbeat of South Scottsdale. It's a really cool area.
Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of activity going on down there. I used to live down that way.
Ah.
But so, all right. So I guess there's kind of a fundamental, mindset or political philosophy. Some people say, yes, that type of activity, involvement, participation from the city council, that's part of their job, their duty.
Mm-hmm.
They should be doing those things. Then you have kind of the laissez-faire, type of people who say, well, let's just let the economy run its course.
Sure.
If people want to build and develop down there, they can build and develop down there, and sort of leave it more in the private sector, right? Let's let the government kind of shrink up and let the government just do its own thing. Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
I don't fall anywhere on that spectrum. I stand on that. I think, the different scenarios that you just painted are they're very important to get a handle on. So the first thing is that everything important that happens in this community from an economic development standpoint will involve the city, some way or another. It also is very important to acknowledge that the private sector is going to play a really important, critical role as well. And so if you look back at all the great things that have happened in the city, it's always been the city and the business community and its citizens working together in partnership. Whether it was the Indian Bend Wash that was created, whether it was, I remember Mayor Drinkwater actually going up to Minnesota and telling the Mayo Clinic that, there's no place that you are going to want to be for the next 20 years but Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah.
We've got the demographic you want. That wasn't Mayo Clinic looking at their strategic plan and just saying, what are we going to do? Somebody from the public sector went up and made that invitation. The Waste Management Open, Mayor Drinkwater went over to the city of Phoenix and talked to the Thunderbirds and brought that over here. So all good things in Scottsdale are happening with the private sector and the free market and the public sector locking arms and saying, let's do this together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful team.
Yeah, it's a good combo.
Yeah.
What does the city council members' day-to-day look like? I mean, is this a full-time job? Are they in an office every day just advocating for the city of Scottsdale, or back there with blueprints and, cordoning off certain areas? How does it work?
Well, I'll tell you this. If you're a city council member and you're in the office all day long, you're in the wrong job.
Got it.
You got to be out. And so, it's important to look at the plans that a developer might bring forward, but then you've got to go out and field test it. You got to go out and kick the dirt and talk to the neighbors where the project's going to be. And you need to know every square inch of this city. It is a job historically that I think it pays anywhere from $13,000 to $18,000 a year. I'm really not sure.
Yeah.
But it is a full-time job. People may go into it thinking that it's not, but this is a very demanding community.
Sure.
And there's a lot of demands placed on public officials to know what's going on. So it ends up being a full-time responsibility.
Yeah. Scottsdale's it's a powerful city, but it's also a pretty small community. When I was there at that Valley or the Scottsdale leadership event with you, there were other city council members there, and there's only 7 people who get to run on that board, or get to run to be on the council. Yeah. And I got the feeling that everybody kind of knew each other, but they were all also running for certain positions and stuff. So it felt almost a little uncomfortable in a sense. Like there were people, kind of, I'm going to stand in this corner, I'm going to stand in this corner because we're running against each other, and then, and all that stuff. How do you manage that? How does that work? How do you have a city council that's functioning, but you've also got every 2 years, some people are running, and there's kind of a lot of competition between people.
Yeah. It's an interesting social dynamic that you obviously have a sensitivity towards.
I picked up on it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
So this is a big, small town.
Yeah.
And people do know each other, and there's a connectedness. It's one of the things that drew me to Scottsdale. I love that sense of, we're 250,000 people, but it is a kind of a place where you feel like you're connected to other people. Even though elected officials sometimes play a little bit of that oppositional magnet dynamic when they're at events, and remember that politics is about differentiation.
Yeah.
If you and I were running and we were exactly the same or represented the same interests, that's not how it works. The public wants to know, why, Rob, are you more prepared to do this than John, or vice versa?
Right.
And so we have to differentiate ourselves. We have to draw distinctions. But in my opinion, that can be done in a very positive way. And I should also point out that this community dynamic could have been really, really different without the preserve, without the McDowell Mountain Preserve. Our build out could have been very close to 500,000 people. But what the public did when they decided to tax themselves to buy that land and take it out of private development, it brought our population down. And our build out now is going to be between 250 and 300,000. That's a much smaller town than 500,000. And so we have the luxury now of maintaining this wonderful dynamic of it being a big town but still feeling like a small town. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, it is nice. But yeah, I can see, I guess it's politics, right? I mean, everybody's got to have a little bit of a thick skin. Yeah. You're going to be running, you're going to be distinguishing yourself, versus the other candidates. Mm-hmm. And that's just part of the game. That's part of the business.
Yeah, it is.
If you can't stomach it, then don't run.
Yeah, you got to have thick skin.
Yeah, you got to have that choice. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about, as you know, I'm a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah.
And we have a big part of what we do is actually kind of fighting the city in certain regards, right? And not the city in general, but the prosecutor's office,
sure,
the city attorney, the police officers, are on the opposite side of what we do when we're representing our people. Right. What is the city council? What is their involvement in all of that? As you said, there's this goal that you want to make sure that services are being delivered, water, fire support, police support, and all that stuff. But how does the city council interface with prosecutors, law enforcement, and those different areas?
Yeah, that's another good question. So in a charter government like the city of Scottsdale's, all 2,600 employees that I talked about earlier do not report directly to the city manager. There's a small number of positions, just like the city manager, that report to the city council. Among them, the city council appoints a city judge that reports directly to the city council. Mm-hmm. City council appoints the city attorney, which mm-hmm. reports directly to the city council. And so the city council is responsible for appointing those critical positions that work and are part of the criminal justice system at the city. The city manager hires the police chief, and so law enforcement is through the city manager. But the courts are separate from the policymakers for, a darn good reason, so that elected officials don't get involved in judicial matters. Mm-hmm. There is, just like the federal government, there's a separation of powers where you do not want elected people imposing their will on the court system or imposing undue influence on the administration of justice.
So the city council does appoint a city judge, though? How does that work?
Yes. They take applications like anything else and appoint a city judge and a city attorney through a competitive human resources process.
Okay. And then do they serve at the pleasure of the city council?
They do. And, as long as the courts are well run and the prosecutor's office is well run and the city attorney's staff is well run and responsible with the resources that they're provided by the city council, they continue to serve in those roles. And so those roles aren't termed. In other words, you don't serve in the city attorney or city judge for a discrete number of years.
Yeah.
You serve until you retire or are replaced for cause.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there's been a lot of movement in the happenings in Scottsdale. We had a prosecutor who was well, I don't know exactly what happened, but she's no longer
Right.
with the city. There's a new prosecutor who just, I believe, started last week.
Mr. Fuller, I think from I think Pima County, was it?
I think
Or Pinal
Gila.
County or Gila County? It
Gila
was?
County,
Okay.
yeah. So the city council, are they involved in actually interviewing those people, or do they delegate that to the city manager and the city attorney?
The city's human resources staff would work with the city council on those selection processes.
Okay, so the city council does have input.
In the process, yes. And the ultimate selection of those. They also just appointed Sherry Scott, I think, to city attorney.
Okay,
So
did that just like very recently?
That's like in the last 10 days.
Okay.
So Sherry Scott is I think she was deputy city attorney and has worked at the city for quite some time. Joe Padilla was the acting city attorney. So Joe will step aside. Sherry will take over, and she'll be the city attorney. The city attorney is the one that selects the city prosecutor, and so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on what are good qualifications for those people, or what are some of the values that you think are important. Because as you said, Scottsdale, it is a small town, but it's I mean, it's a big small town, I think is how you said it. And we do have a unique we've got some unique demographics. There are some events in Scottsdale that draw certain types of offenses that people kind of get roped into doing. And, Old Town, which our office is about 7 minutes north of there, we see a lot of activity. It's a lot of, the same stuff, disorderly conducts and the urinating in public and all of those things. And so you need to balance, of course, the law and order component of running a city with the goals of creating order, but you also, you don't want to destroy people's lives with having criminal convictions. You want to, from my perspective, I want to be more rehabilitative. I want to show people, look, maybe this is how you want to be responsible when you're drinking alcohol. You can't do these things, but we also don't want to saddle them with a criminal conviction that's going to follow them around forever. So you got some competing interests, especially as a city council person. What's your take on that whole realm of law and order?
Well, I think to begin with, you have to start out with people that have a clear sense of mission. And I think the city of Scottsdale is very fortunate to have one of the best police chiefs in the country, Alan Rodbell, who understands the philosophy behind community policing, that understands that there is a economic impact on the city, on the way people perceive police work being done.
Mm-hmm.
We have, as you mentioned, the entertainment district downtown, which has its unique set of issues and concerns. But the police department in this case has a very strong working relationship with the people that own the bars and the nightclubs and the restaurants and the downtown business operators. They all work very closely together because they know that is downtown's golden goose.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember a few years ago, there was some extraordinary enforcement action taken against a nightclub that, where things were really problematic. And we realized if we were going to have to sanction them by taking their use permit back, that it would, hurt economically. So the focus, as you just alluded to, the point is not to be punitive. The point is to be corrective, and to make sure that we can have a successful entertainment district, and that it will be safe and a place where wouldn't mind our kids going and having fun.
Yeah. We have noticed, just to kind of buttress your point, we have noticed that the police do seem to have very, very close relationships with a lot of the bars and restaurants and those things. Sometimes to good effect, other times not to good effect. In our experience, what we see is that people will get in trouble, and the bouncers there, the security that they have, who aren't often credentialed people, who really don't have a lot of I would say, pure intentions there. They're out there looking to kind of rough somebody up or throw somebody out. They're not the pillars of society that we would want them to be. Yeah. But they will get into a situation where they will injure somebody or throw them out to law enforcement. Law enforcement, sort of working in conjunction with the bouncers and the restaurants, will then swoop somebody up, and it almost seems very systematized and almost inappropriate in certain scenarios. Like there's almost kind of this kind of collusion going on between the two entities, and it results in our experience, in a lot of people who really shouldn't have been charged. I mean, we've seen it. I know this is not your area of expertise or something you probably want to comment on, but while I have you, we see people where the police will arrest somebody, we'll get the body cams, we'll get the surveillance footage, and it will be essentially a wrongful arrest. I mean, it should never happen, and that person now has to hire a lawyer and all this stuff. So I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement in that, and but I do agree with your perspective on it, that corrective rather than punitive is probably the right way to go.
Well, that's my philosophy, and I spent a number of years as the executive director of downtown development at the city of Scottsdale. I know a lot of the entertainment operators down there. I know what their commitment is to the city. I also know that they all want to be successful business people.
Sure.
But we have this, every Friday night and Saturday night, think of this for a second, there are 60 to 75,000 people that visit downtown Scottsdale on any given night on the weekend. That's like emptying out State Farm Stadium for a Cardinals game every weekend in downtown.
It's a lot.
Now you add some, alcohol and entertainment, and it can be combustible. So it does take people with a steady hand and a clear sense of vision to manage that. One of the things I'm going to do when I'm elected is there's other cities have figured out some really effective ways of managing this. And sometimes it turns out that there are a few bartenders, for example, that might be over-serving. Mm-hmm. The rest of them might be doing just a great job, but I'm not certain that Uber and Lyft have helped that situation, because now people think they can drink with impunity.
Sure.
And because they've got a ride home. So I think education is always such a big part of the solution that can create an environment where people can come down and have a great time. If someone misbehaves, it's handled appropriately.
Yeah.
And that we preserve this very cool place that we've created in downtown.
Yeah.
And not have to deal with the negative impacts of that, but it takes everybody working together.
Yeah, it's complicated. I don't think there is really any easy answer. One of the things that I think is appropriate, and I want to get your take on it, is I understand when there's a dispute at a bar, there's, like you said, thousands and thousands of people, it's dark, there's alcohol, there is real risk to for something dangerous to happen to police or to bouncers and law enforcement. And so their priority, from our experience, and I don't necessarily disagree with it a lot, is to just make the arrests and then let the legal system sort it out later. Mm-hmm. So they'll arrest, 3 or 4 people, even though one person was really the aggressor. Everybody will get arrested, and then they'll sort it out, because from their perspective, they're just getting them off the street, ending the kerfuffle, taking it, removing it from that kind of combustion chamber and taking it elsewhere. But then what we had seen, and it's hard to come to a determination either way, because we have a new prosecutor, we have a new city attorney, everything's changing right now. But what we had seen in the past is that Scottsdale would not offer, the prosecutor's office would not offer what's called diversion for certain offense. Diversion is where you go, you say, yeah, it's my first offense, I've never been in trouble before, I'm going to go take a anger management class or a substance abuse class or something like that. City gets a little bit of money because you got to pay your fines and fees for that. But at the completion of that program, they dismiss the charge. So then, all right, our client is able to kind of earn it a little bit. The city gets something back out of it, and then they can go on their way. But the city of Scottsdale was not, for a long time, and still today, is not offering that for certain offenses, which I think are absolutely appropriate. That's appropriate for that. What's your take on that type of a program?
Well, I can't speak directly to that. Like I said, I left the city in 2009. So in terms of what the culture is, in terms of offering that as an option, I'm not familiar with what they're actually doing today. But what I can tell you is that if there are alternative ways of delivering city services, in this case public safety services, and there's better ways to do it that might have less impact on people, but at the same vein, create a safe and harmonious and productive business environment, I would encourage the people like yourselves and maybe your law firm, some of the bar owners and the police department to sit down and say, what is the optimal way of dealing this? How can we make sure that we're charging people that need to be charged and not creating ancillary damage just in order to expedite a response. So that is something that I know that the police department, law enforcement in particular, would love to have a conversation about, and that would be something I'd encourage.
Yeah, and we would love to be a part of that. And obviously, I was being a little self-serving by bringing that up as I have you running for office on it.
Yeah, take the opportunity.
I'm going to take it.
Take your shot.
I had to. If I didn't, the other attorneys here would be like, "What the heck were you talking about?" In there talking about not stuff that matters to them. But all right, well, cool. So yeah, I do think your direction on that is good. It should be a conversation. I don't think that there's an easy answer one way or the other. But from our perspective, the people who we represent, 99% of the time, they're very good people. They're just out having a good time. Something happens. They may or may not have been the aggressor, but in our opinion, they don't deserve to have that follow them around forever. So if we can move it that way, I would be happy to see that move in that direction.
Well, things can move when people talk, and if people have a different idea and introduce new thoughts. My business actually. This is not my business running for city council. My business actually is called Social Prosperity Partners. And our business is community engagement, which is getting people to have courageous conversations that need to happen about our communities and the places we live. So, if my response to many issues oftentimes is not to come up with the content or the solution. My response is, let's get people that are stakeholders in this at a table in an environment that's safe, and let's have a conversation about what needs to happen. Wonderful, magical things happen when people can sit down and, instead of representing their self-interest, begin to focus more on community interest. And I think the issue that you bring up is one of community interests. What is in the interest of all of us in the community in terms of how we handle that? So, I'd encourage anybody to sit down around the table and have a good conversation about what needs to be done.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think it's better for the city as a whole. We do have people who come here, and there's a couple bars in particular. There's just a pattern of these things going on, and I won't name them by name on this one, but we have people who tell us, "I will never ever come back to Scottsdale again, never again," because of how they were treated and because of the whole thing. And I can't say I blame them, that's a sad thing, because it is a beautiful city, and we do have a lot of very important things going on here.
I had a funny story about that, a very brief funny story, but there was a bar downtown that was having behavioral issues and police issues, and they're always there. And so the city at the time, was threatening to say, we're going to revoke your conditional use permit. As soon as word got out that could be in play, one of the largest department stores over at Fashion Square sent a letter to the mayor and city council that said, we're going to be really upset if you close that place, because all of our buyers that come in from out of town, from New York and Chicago and the West Coast, that's where they go. They go have lunch there. They go there after work. That's a really cool place that our people like in your downtown. So fix the problem, but don't close the place. That's sort of the nuclear option.
Sure.
So everybody's interested in that, just not the people you'd think would be interested, but the people that run big businesses and retail and the most successful shopping center in Arizona are interested in that entertainment district and that it works good and that it's safe for their people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, nobody wants, I think, people, unnecessarily arrested and injured and charged with crimes. So
Right.
we just have to, I guess, continue to have that conversation.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest pressing issues that the city council is going to need to address in this next term?
Well, I'll give you one that I don't think's on a lot of people's radar screen, and that is, I remember many, many years ago when I worked at the city had a really close working relationship with Scottsdale Unified School District.
Mm-hmm.
We've grown apart. The Scottsdale Unified School District is a different political subdivision, different funding source. It's a different deal, different board. City's different from the schools, completely separate
Wow,
in that regard. And as you might guess, a city's sustainable future is dependent on having a good school system.
Sure.
If you have a bad school system, your property values go down. Companies won't relocate here. They don't want to send their kids to a substandard school. So it's in the city's interest to have a high-performing school district.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the school's district's interest to have a high-performing city.
Yeah.
It's a symbiotic relationship between those two that we've let grow stale. And I think one of the critical issues that we need to face in this city is how do we create a stronger relationship between the educational system and the municipal government, and working with the chamber and the Charros and other organizations, how do we create a strong all-community partnership so that all ships are raised, so that we are a high-performing school system, a high-performing city, and that translates into a really positive business environment in a place where our community values, our property values are maintained. I think it's a critical strategy that needs to be employed.
And how does that evolve? How does it go from something that's workable to something that where the relationship is kind of chilly between the two entities, and then how do you repair that?
Well, I think the simple word for me is started out in where you and I met. It's leadership.
Yeah.
It's people stepping forward that say, I recognize that there's a relationship between the success of my city and the success of our children, our academics, the success of our institutions. And so one of the things that I'm proposing, I'd written an article a number of months ago now to the newspaper about the city has a general plan that outlines the vision for our city.
Mm-hmm.
It does not have an education element to it. It's got a transportation element. It's got a housing element. It's got economic development element. It's got all these different elements about defining the vision for the city, and it doesn't have a single element in there about education. And so I would propose that the city of Scottsdale adopt an education element to its general plan to create a much stronger partnership between the city and our schools. Our future is our kids and our grandkids. They're going to live here long after we're gone, and we need them to be able to come into this city and find an affordable place to live in their early years of their profession, in their careers. And then we need the kids to go through school, to get jobs in our city, and have housing that they can enjoy, and great schools. And then as we get older, a place where people on fixed incomes can also live here. So we really create a city where you can live cradle to grave with great schools, and that's what we need.
Yeah, and Arizona just in general kind of has a bad reputation for schools.
Yeah.
So you can really focus your efforts on even a more granular local level to obviously support people like you who are going to go in there and then take some concrete action and make some changes that are going to impact the people of Scottsdale.
Yeah, it's just we have to do it. We have to once again move from a attitude of self-interest to community interest. And I think we all know what the right thing to do, but we need concrete plans, we need actions, and we need things that we can hold hands on and move forward.
Yeah. Well, you've been in this space for 24 years. I know you're working for the government for the city of Scottsdale.
Yeah.
You've got a number of other qualifications: founding chairman of the board for NOAH, board member, Miracle League of Arizona, grand member of the Scottsdale Charros, past president and advisory board member of Scottsdale Leadership. It just goes on and on and on. You've been obviously well connected for a long period of time, and it sounds like you're going to be, continuing that journey and that path. What do you do for fun? What do you do in your personal life outside of running for office and changing the way the city works?
Wow. Right. We'll switch gears, and
Yeah.
I will tell you that I like being outdoors. It's one of the things that drew me to Arizona. I like hiking in the preserve. I like road biking. I ride every year in the bike ride across Iowa called RAGBRAI.
Cool.
And my wife and I do that. We do that together. I love to play golf.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty decent golfer. So if you want to get out on the course with me, I'm going to get after your wallet if we get out there.
You'll take the whole thing.
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't golf.
taking everything.
You'll
I take
it
no
all.
prisoners on the golf course.
Yeah.
And we also like to travel a lot. My wife and I do a fair amount of traveling. We've got two granddaughters right now, very young, and another one on the way. So that'll start taking up
Congratulations.
some time. And I love roses. We've got 50 rose bushes in the backyard, and they take up a lot of our time.
Yeah. The roses are tough.
Roses are tough, especially in Arizona, but they are very hardy. And November
Yeah.
is a great time. We get a bloom in November and another big bloom in March. So love gardening, love the desert Southwest. We live in a really special place.
It is special. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm excited that, that there are people like you running. I think it's good. Somebody who's obviously got a lot of experience. You've thought about a lot of the issues. Is there anything else that I missed? Anything else that you think is important that we needed to cover?
I don't know. I'm just happy that people feel so connected to this city. We've argued for a long time in our city, Rob, about are we going to be the westmost western town, or are we going to be something more urban and contemporary? And everybody talks about building height and density, and it's changing the character of our town. Our brand has always been quality. It can be, you can build something really bad quality that's single level, and that doesn't serve the city of Scottsdale. So I think we need to focus on quality and stop arguing so much about necessarily building height and density. It is important. Our downtown is growing. We have to pay attention to that. But there's, I think the argument about are we going to be the westmost western town or something else, that dumbs down the argument. That doesn't honor the complexity of it. This really can literally be where the old West meets the new West.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big enough place that we can carve out those places that are important to us, whether it's finding yourself alone all day out in the preserve, hiking on the trails, or enjoying the vibrancy of the entertainment scene downtown. We can have it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And when is the election? Is it
Yeah, it's a primary in August, and then the general election will be November 2020. And, I notice all the books you have in your office, there's some from, Arnold Schwarzenegger and other political figures. It's 2020 is going to be a really interesting year. We're going to have a presidential election. We're going to have a U.S. Senate election. We're going to have an election for sheriff. We're going to have the state legislature is in a tipping point between Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of messaging. And I think if we can all sort of tone down our collective rhetoric, focus on issues and the things that'll enhance our quality of life. And, I want to know every bit. I want to know what you want. It's just as important as what I want.
Right.
And we need to find different ways of talking to each other. And I think 2020 can be a real watershed year for us as a country and as a community. So I'm very optimistic about the future, but it all begins with us being able to share the things that are important to us.
Does the city council, I know it's a nonpartisan position, are you involved in the primary? Is there an election for your position in the primary?
Yes, in August. It depends on how many people run. So let's say there's 3 open positions, and if there's only 3 candidates, there's no need for a primary. You just go right on to the general election. The primary is only to narrow the field.
Okay.
And so
the top recipients of the votes will move on to the general.
Exactly. And so we really don't know yet, because I think there's only 3 of us that have filed our paperwork.
Yeah.
But I anticipate that field will probably double or more.
Sure.
And that there will be a primary in August.
Okay. Yeah. And you're getting started early.
I'm
You're ready to
that's
go.
just me. I'm ready to go. There's a lot of stuff to do, and it's an unfortunate part of today's politics that so much money is needed to run for office these days. I'm a little dismayed by it, frankly.
Yeah.
You could actually, and before I leave the office, if you'd like to leave me a check for $6,350, you can.
Is that it? Yeah.
Well, but my point is that it feels to me that's too much money for a city council race. And if someone's married, their husband and wife can give up to $13,000 for a city council race. It seems almost to be a corrupting influence.
That's a lot of money.
Well, it is a lot of money, and if you and your partner gave me $13,000 and then called me and said, hey, I got a problem with my neighbor's barking dog.
Sure.
I mean, you're going to expect me to call out the National Guard.
Right.
So I think it creates an expectation on the part of the giver that you're giving with the intent of receiving something.
Yeah.
And I think that's not good for politics.
Yeah.
Especially at the local level.
Yeah, especially at the local level.
Yeah.
Yeah, people think that, you'll get a variance on some building code or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not, if somebody gives me money, it comes with no strings. There are no expectations, and that's just not what we're going to do.
Yeah. Well, what are the best places for people to follow you? Speaking of support, speaking of money, obviously you're going to need support. You're going to need voters. You're going to be running a hard campaign. You're going to need funds.
Yeah.
What are the best places for people to connect with you to do that?
Well, it sounds like somebody's trying to connect with me right now on my phone, but the best place to connect with me is at John Little, Scottsdale2020.com, and that's my website. It's got everything on there. But, in all honesty, Rob, the best place to connect with me is to invite me in to your home. I come to people's businesses. I come to their homes. I go to their neighborhood HOA meetings, and I really believe that local politics, as you started out this podcast, noting that local politics is what touches us most intimately,
right,
in terms of the services. And I think as an elected official at the local level, I also need and benefit from that intimacy with the people I serve.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, that's fantastic. So John Little running for Scottsdale City Council, John Little, Scottsdale2020.com. And I'll throw your phone number out there too. I know somebody was calling you, 480-720-4777. So connect with John and learn more about him and invite him into your home. Obviously, you're a conversations guy. I think you're a big ideas guy. You've got a ton of experience, and I wish you the best of luck. Would really love to have you back at some point, especially if things start heating up a little bit. We'll have another conversation.
Well, and thank you for providing this kind of podcast for the people that watch and listen. I think it is a public service to, as we share ideas about the future of the community we live in, and we address some of the difficult issues. Communications vehicles like this, I think, play a really important part of that, and I respect you for the work that you're doing in that regard, and we'll connect later on, perhaps in the coming year, okay?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right.
And I support you also. Thank you very much, John. Thanks for coming in today on the Gruler Nation.
All right. Thanks, Rob.